What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. In this episode, I am probably going to ruffle some feathers. So I just want to put this disclaimer out there before we dive into the topic of this video. If you are a Carson Wentz hater, if you don't like this quarterback, you're probably not going to like this video because I'm going to call some people out that have been, in my opinion, have been doing some really dumb things, have been saying some dumb things, have been making some dumb assumptions, have been running with some dumb narratives. I just wanted to talk about it. I touched on it a little bit in our post-game recap. I went on a little bit of my rant calling out some of these people. I felt like it deserved its own segment, kind of talking about that. So let's get into this. So Carson Wentz, not a great game on Saturday, right? I mean, he only completed 5 out of 12 passes, not even 100 yards, had a touchdown, had an interception, a really dumb interception in that game that kind of potentially swung the momentum back for the Patriots to be back in that game. Fortunately, Jonathan Taylor sealed the game. But I honestly think we can say Carson Wentz had his worst game as a Colt, even though he only attempted 12 passes. He was making some dumb decisions kind of all night. He did help in the run game a little bit. He had a couple quarterback sneaks. But beyond that, a pretty forgettable night for Carson Wentz. But I don't know, man. I've just been looking on Twitter and different places like that, and it just has been so weird how fans can just jump like from one game to the next. They can jump into this whole weird narrative that they have, right? So what I'm talking about, of course, is how some people just have this insane grading scale of Carson Wentz. He's under this microscope, in my opinion, that is way too unfair. Now, I know he's not the only one. There's some other quarterbacks as well who have been under that, but it seems like Carson Wentz has been one of the most quarterbacks that everything he does, right, is under a microscope. Everything he does, whether pretty much bad, not really even good, is criticized, and he's called bad. He's trash talked all the time by so many people, everything that he does, right? And so, I will say this. I'll say this in defense of those people real fast. You did trade away a first-round pick this year for Carson Wentz, so you do expect some level of competency from your quarterback, right? And you do think now with the way the Colts are trending at 8-6, they're going to be probably a wild card team. You think, okay, within that 20 to 30 range, the Colts are going to be picking. They would be picking in this next year's draft, right? So you do expect some level of competency and some really good level of play from your quarterback. But you do think also what quarterback's going to be available that's worth anything, especially in this weak quarterback class in that frame. But I will say, for the sake of argument, I do agree. When you give up that amount of draft capital for a quarterback, you do expect some level of play. Now, I will say, looking at Carson Wentz as a whole this season, I think he's been pretty decent. I think he's been right around – he hasn't been a top 10 quarterback in my opinion, but I think he's been fringe top 10. He's been anywhere from 12 to 15 in my opinion. You look at him overall as a quarterback, he's completed 62.7% of his passes, thrown for 3,005 yards, 23 touchdowns, 6 picks. Okay, that's not too awful, right, for Carson Wentz this year. I mean, he has right around a 95 quarterback rating, right in that mid-90s quarterback rating. So, I mean, that's pretty good. That's about where I would rank him, about when I said like 11, 12, all the way up to 15, around that range. Fringe top 10 for Carson Wentz, in my opinion. So I think it's fair to say he hasn't been elite this year, right? I think that's fair. But he also hasn't been bad. He hasn't been as bad as some people think he is. Right after that game on Saturday, people were saying, I had a guy that said the Colts can't win with Carson Wentz. He can't take them to the place where they're going to go. And I wanted to touch on this next point because I think that's almost borderline hilarious to me that somebody would say that. Carson Wentz has had a couple games this year where he hasn't been good. Let's just call it what it is. He's been bad in a couple games this year. Okay. All quarterbacks have bad games. Heck, Tom Brady didn't even score yesterday. He didn't even score. Nobody's talking about that. So, my point is, when people just look at one game and they don't fail to look at the other 12 games that Carson Wentz has played, where I think he's been an above-average quarterback, I just don't understand. That's the disconnect for me. It makes no sense why people run with this narrative that Carson Wentz isn't a good quarterback, right? And also, you got to factor in, he hasn't had Paris Campbell for the majority of this season. He didn't have T.Y. Hilton for a number of games this year. And when they have been on the field, especially T.Y. Hilton, they've been largely ineffective this year, right? Carson Wentz should have had another passing touchdown on Saturday, but Mo Alley Cox just dropped it. That's not on Carson Wentz. That's on Mo Alley Cox right there. There's this narrative also that people say, man, I don't know about Carson. I don't know if he can win us the big game. So I said, okay, let me look back on a couple games this year where the Colts have lost, right? There's only been, I would say, I'm going to look at 2 games where the Colts have lost, but I would say wasn't Carson Wentz's fault. I think he actually put them in position to win in these 2 games, right? The first game that I'm going to talk about is the game that happened a couple weeks ago. That's the Tampa Bay game. Now, people will say, oh, well, you let them back into that game, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but Carson Wentz in this offense drove down the field to tie that game at the end of the game. Why did the Colts lose? It's because of the defense. The defense wasn't able to stop Tampa Bay, wasn't able to stop Leonard Fournette and give the offense another chance to score. Carson Wentz wasn't responsible also for the strip sack. It's not his fault that Eric Fisher can't block to save his life at times. It's not his fault that happened. Right? That happens. That's not on the quarterback. That's on the left tackle. It's not his fault that the defense couldn't stop anybody in that second half. It's not his fault that all these things happened. Yeah, quarterback obviously deserves blame. And I think, even though he threw 2 interceptions in that game, the first one was kind of tic-tac. It could have been a pass interference, honestly. But okay, if we just say that's his fault, that's fine, whatever. And then you look at the second one, all right, Hail Mary. It happens. That's like a last effort play. All right, whatever. I don't really mind that interception. You're trying to win the game. All right, whatever. Okay, that's the first game. I think Carson Wentz was great in that game. I honestly think it was one of his better performances. He, against Tampa Bay, the world champions. I know they weren't great against the pass, but they have shut down some teams this year, right? So I really felt like Carson Wentz was not to blame. I think if the defense would have done their job and the Colts maybe would have balanced it a little bit more. I know, he had the idea of running the ball, all that stuff, but I don't think Carson Wentz was the issue in that game. I think he put them in position to win. He did his job. All right, let's talk about the second game, the Baltimore game. Okay, Carson Wentz, if you say Carson Wentz was the issue in that game, the dude threw for over 400 yards in that game. He was constantly putting them in positions to win, and the defense had an epic meltdown in that game. Epic meltdown. Carson Wentz had them in position to win in that game. If the defense doesn't have that meltdown, the Colts win that game 10 out of 10 times, right? So those are just 2 games. There's other games that you could even point to, like say the Rams game. Obviously, Carson Wentz got hurt in that game still early in the season. He was basically playing on 2 injured ankles, and the Colts would not let him go back into that game. I think he probably would have tried if the Colts would have let him, but they didn't let him go back into that game. And that's what people say. They questioned his toughness there, and I'm like, he couldn't go back in. So I don't understand that narrative either, but that's another point for another podcast. So basically what I'm saying is I just don't understand the narrative for why people just, for some reason, still can't believe that Carson Wentz is the guy. I got news for these people. Whether you like it or not, Carson Wentz is the guy for at least the next couple of years. Colts are locked into that contract for Carson Wentz. I think they believe Carson Wentz is a good quarterback. I believe that Carson Wentz is a good quarterback. I believe he had a bad game. Those things happen. He had some dumb decisions. I'm sure the Colts will look at it. They'll point those things out. Say, Carson, you can't do that. Carson knows this. Every quarterback makes dumb decisions. He's only had 6 interceptions this whole year. He has been really actually pretty good for most of the year at taking care of the football. So I just don't get the narrative, guys. I don't get those people. At this point, I just feel like, okay, you have to have some agenda against Carson Wentz at this point to not see this. Let's call it for what it is. Bad game on Saturday. All right. He's had a couple of those, but overall, I think he's been pretty good. He's even had some games where he's been elite this year. So, and also, I want to throw in the fact that it's not like the Colts were playing a bad passing defense. They were playing against a top 3 passing defense. Now, that's not an excuse for the bad play, but I get it. Like the New England's really good at making pretty decent quarterbacks not look good this year. They've done it with different teams over the years. So I just wanted to throw that one out there too. Not an excuse. Carson Wentz needs to be better in those games, but I think overall as a whole, when I look at this Carson Wentz trade now that the Colts have officially given away that first-round pick, I would still take that trade. I think he has been absolutely fine. And heck, like Derek said, Carson Wentz has his worst game of the year and you still win by 10. He'll take that against the top team in the AFC every single time. He's going to bounce back. I really feel like he's going to bounce back against Arizona, hopefully shut some people up who, it's crazy, like the standard that people hold Carson Wentz to, if he makes one mistake, he's all of a sudden the worst quarterback in the world. I don't understand it. I think it's really shallow, really, honestly, pretty pathetic that people do that. Because if any other quarterback, like if Carson Wentz had a Tom Brady-like day where they scored 0 points in that game, people would be running him out of town right now. Those people would be saying Carson Wentz is the worst thing ever. Didn't have much of a better game. But you know what I mean? Like, even great quarterbacks have bad weeks. So let's call it for what it is. It was a bad week by Carson Wentz against one of the best defenses in the league. All right, cool. Let's move on. Let's go forward. The Colts are the number 5 seed. Let's stop nitpicking these things that ultimately don't really matter. The Colts are 8-6 right now. They still have 3 games to go. They're going to face Arizona, who, by the way, looks very beatable right now after Detroit just handed them their lunch on Sunday. And they're going to play the Raiders, and they're going to play Jacksonville. I really feel like Carson Wentz has been absolutely fine. People point to the yardage, people point to the touchdowns and say, man, not really that great. But I say, look, you have the leading rusher in the league who's about to set the Colts franchise record for touchdowns in a season. He actually just did on Saturday by scoring his last touchdown, the one that sealed that game. He is now the leader in touchdown runs in a course of a regular season for the Colts. So I'm fine with what Carson Wentz has done this year. I just don't understand the hate for Carson Wentz. I think it's very unwarranted. I think it's very unfair to hold him under this microscope that a lot of quarterbacks don't get held to. If we're going to hold a standard, let's hold it for everybody. I don't like that standard that some people hold for Carson Wentz as opposed to other quarterbacks. So I'm fine with Carson Wentz. I think, honestly, he's going to be even better next year because now he's comfortable in this system a little bit more. He's comfortable with the guys around him. I think the Colts are personally going to give him more weapons this offseason. I think they need to do that. They don't really have anybody outside of Michael Pittman. And when Pittman went out of that game, I think it was a really big deal. I also think maybe they'll address tight end more than we're talking about. So I think Carson Wentz is going to be better. Ultimately, I think for having no training camp really and really having no offseason, I think Carson Wentz has been honestly better than I expected. And I think he's been a really decent quarterback this year. He's been right around fringe top 10 quarterback for the Colts. And when you have the best runner in football, I mean, that's what you want, man. And the good thing is he can do other things too with his legs, right? He can scramble when you need to. He can quarterback sneak when you need to. So I think physically he's got everything you want in this offense. He's got to clean up a few things, obviously. But I like where the Colts are with Carson Wentz. So that's kind of my rant here on those Carson Wentz haters. I don't like the standard that people set on him. And I think a lot of people agree with this. There's a few people who push back. And I don't think people quite understand that I wasn't saying Carson Wentz had a good game on Saturday. I get it. He had a bad game. Not a great game at all. But I think we just call it what it is and we move on, right? And we move on and we stop nitpicking wins. You know what I mean? Like, let's just stop nitpicking wins so much. Let's move forward. If we can do that with bad quarterback play for 1 week, that's not been the norm for Carson Wentz this year. We'll be absolutely fine down the stretch. I truly believe that. All right, that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I honestly know there's going to be a few people who are going to be angry at this video. Honestly, I do not care. Like, if you are angry at this video, whatever. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And as always, go Colts.